3 times. That is how many times Nyesom Wike's lawmakers moved to remove Siminalayi Fubara from the Rivers State Government House. 3 separate impeachment drives, 3 formal notices, 3 rounds of constitutional procedure weaponized against a sitting governor. And 3 times, every single time, it failed. Now, as of February 2026, Wike has gone on camera and announced publicly on the record that he has directed those lawmakers to stand down, to obey, to fall in line behind the man they spent 2 years trying to destroy. Let that sit with you for a moment. The godfather who built the machine, the minister who commanded the assault, the man who told River State audiences in public that Fubara's second term was not automatic, that same man is now calling off the dogs. But here is the question nobody in Nigerian media is stopping to ask. What did Fubara give up, and to whom, to make this peace happen? Because in Nigerian politics, peace is never free, and the terms of this particular deal have never been made public. Not one line, not one clause. The agreement reached inside Aso Rock in February 2026 remains sealed. Before we get to what was agreed behind those closed doors, we need to understand how a man who was suspended from office, humiliated before the nation, and left politically exposed, ended up with his godfather directing lawmakers to bow. That answer will change how you read every political story coming out of the Niger Delta for the next 2 years. Before we go further, if you're new here, this channel exists for one reason: to give Nigerians the political analysis mainstream media is too afraid or too compromised to deliver. Hit subscribe and stay with me. This gets deeper. To understand where we are today, you have to go back to March 18th, 2025. That is the day President Bola Tinubu declared a state of emergency in Rivers. The governor, Fubara, was suspended. His deputy, Ngozi Odu, was suspended. Every elected member of the Rivers State House of Assembly suspended. A retired Vice Admiral, Ibok Ete Ibas, was installed as sole administrator. Governance in Nigeria's second most revenue-generating state was handed to a military man in a civilian suit. The official explanation was political instability that had paralyzed governance and threatened national stability. That was the surface narrative, a president restoring order in a troubled state. Here is the buried narrative. The instability did not arise from nowhere. For months before that declaration, Wike's loyal lawmakers had forwarded formal gross misconduct allegations against Fubara and his deputy. They had blocked the governor from presenting his budget to the State Assembly. They had refused to acknowledge official correspondence from the executive. They had, in effect, made it constitutionally impossible for a sitting elected governor to govern. And when Fubara tried to respond, legally, institutionally, they escalated. The state of emergency was not a neutral intervention. It was the destination that a deliberate legislative siege had been building toward for over a year. Now, for historical context, keep it brief, because Rivers people know this pattern. Rotimi Amechi dismantled Peter Odili's political structures. Then Wike dismantled Amechi's. Rivers State does not produce permanent overlords. Every godfather who thought he had locked in control eventually discovered that the state's political culture ejects them. The question is always whether the man being squeezed survives long enough to reverse the tide. And here is the fact that reframes this entire story, the thing most coverage completely buried. The emergency rule was lifted on September 18, 2025. Fubara returned to Government House, and within 12 weeks, by December 9, 2025, he had defected from the PDP to the APC. That move was not a retreat. It was a calculated repositioning, and it worked in ways Wike had not anticipated. Let's talk about the actual mechanism of power here, because this is where most of the analysis goes shallow. Nigeria's constitution gives state legislators extraordinary destructive capability when they move in concert. They can initiate impeachment proceedings, they can reject an appropriation bill and starve the executive of legal spending authority. They can simply refuse to sit, refuse to correspond, refuse to function. And there is very little a governor can do if the courts don't move fast enough. Wike's lawmakers used all of it. At one point, the Rivers House of Assembly formally barred Fubara from presenting his MTEF and his 2026 budget until the impeachment probe was concluded. A governor without a budget is a governor without a state. He cannot pay contractors, he cannot execute projects, he cannot demonstrate governance, which then becomes the accusation used against him. It's a trap built from constitutional text, and they deployed it precisely. Wike said something in July 2025 that deserves far more scrutiny than it received. He declared publicly that peace had returned to Rivers, and in the same breath, he acknowledged that certain individuals had been fed fat from the crisis. His exact words, that they had treated the crisis like their personal oil well from which they drew illicit benefit. He said it almost casually, as if he was describing someone else's problem. But those individuals were operating within a political space he controlled. The legislative disruption created contract voids, appointment freezes, and budget paralysis in one of Nigeria's richest states. Somebody profited from that paralysis, and Wike just confirmed it publicly while declining to name anyone. This was never a governance dispute. The 2027 calculation has been embedded in every move since Fubara's inauguration. Wike said it directly at a public rally while Fubara was still sitting governor that the second-term ticket was not automatic, that Rivers people should not repeat the same mistake, and that your ticket is something you have to earn. He did not mention Fubara's name. He did not need to. A serving minister in Abuja publicly telling the voters of Rivers State that Fubara's sitting governor's re-election is a mistake to be corrected, that is not political commentary. That is a campaign declaration, and it was made before Fubara had even completed 2 years in office. The APC defection in December 2025 was the strategic move that shifted the entire board. By joining the ruling party, Fubara placed himself directly under Tinubu's political protection. The National Security Advisor, Nuhu Ribadu, reportedly conveyed presidential satisfaction with Fubara's leadership. When the NSA is delivering approval signals from the presidency, that is not gossip. That is a policy position communicated through proper channels. And then, the APC's own national chairman, Professor Nentawe Yilwata, publicly declared Fubara the leader of APC in Rivers State, citing standard party practice that sitting governors control state structures. The APC National Secretary, Ajibola Basiru, went further. He publicly warned Wike to stay out of Rivers' APC affairs entirely, pointing out that Wike remains a PDP member and has no standing in the ruling party's internal affairs. Read that again. A serving minister appointed by the APC president was told by the APC National Secretariat that he has no standing in the party. That is not a minor rebuke. That is an institutional demotion delivered in public. Here is the financial thread that the mainstream coverage consistently missed. An APC group in the South made a direct allegation in January 2026. They claimed the impeachment threats against Fubara were not triggered by any constitutional violation, but by his refusal to approve fictitious projects embedded in the Rivers State 2026 budget. The claim was that the NJA Wike lawmakers had submitted inflated, non-existent budget line items, and when Fubara refused to sign off on them, they reached for the impeachment mechanism as punishment. If that allegation is accurate and it has not been formally denied by the Assembly, then this entire crisis has a financial explanation that sits underneath all the political language about loyalty and succession. Control of Rivers' appropriation is control of billions in oil-linked expenditure. That is what was being fought over. Not respect, not protocol, budget lines. One name appears in every thread of this story. Martin Amewele, Speaker of Rivers State House of Assembly. He led the Wike loyal members through all 3 impeachment attempts. He was the face of legislative resistance for over 2 years, and then in December 2025, he led 17 of those same lawmakers in defecting from PDP to APC. the same party Fubara had just joined. So now, you have a situation where the man who organized the assault on Fubara is sitting inside the same party as his target. Amewele's loyalty remains with Wike. His party registration now places him under Fubara's authority as the APC governor. What Amewele does next, whether he genuinely submits or continues resistance from inside the tent, is the institutional key to this story. We will come back to exactly what that means. But here is what almost nobody has connected yet, and it changes the entire picture. The same peace deal that appears on its face to show Fubara begging for mercy may actually have been the moment he locked in the terms of his own political survival on his terms, not Wike's. The question is what those terms cost him. Let's zoom out, because what happens in rivers does not stay in rivers. Rivers is the second largest contributor to Nigeria's federation account. It hosts critical oil infrastructure. It controls a major commercial port. When governance in rivers is paralyzed, when budgets cannot be passed, contractors cannot be paid, commissioners cannot be confirmed, the consequences move through the FAAC system to every state in Nigeria. A state of emergency in rivers is an economic event with national implications, not a local political drama. For ordinary rivers residents, the human cost has been documented and largely ignored. Even as the political theater was playing out, reporting from Port Harcourt showed collapsed school infrastructure, overcrowded classrooms, absent facilities, systemic decay that predated Fubara but worsened under a government unable to pass its own budget. Billions of state revenue were flowing through a government that had been legislatively cannibalized. Every month the assembly blocked appropriation was a month of frozen governance for 8 million people. On security, political instability in oil-producing states has a well-documented relationship with the expansion of armed non-state actors. The months of emergency rule and preceding legislative paralysis created operational space. As 2027 approaches and the political contest intensifies, that space does not automatically close. Now, back to Martin Amewele, the speaker who carried Wike's legislative agenda for 2 years and now sits inside Fubara's party. The question his presence inside APC raises is constitutionally significant. Does Fubara now control the Rivers Assembly, or does Wike still command Amewele's bloc from outside the party? If they genuinely submit to Fubara, he controls the legislature for the first time since taking office. If they continue resistance from inside APC, the conflict takes on a new dimension that Tinubu will be forced to adjudicate on the record, in public, ahead of 2027. That adjudication will reveal exactly how much political protection Fubara actually has versus how much was implied to get him through the immediate crisis. Here is the fact that reframes the national stakes entirely. Reports published just days ago in April 2026 indicate that Wike's political group is believed to control not just the PDP structure in Rivers, but the APC structure as well. Both of them. If that is accurate, and these are sourced political claims, not speculation, then Fubara defected into a party whose Rivers chapter is still managed by his opponent's network. His membership card is Form 001, but the ward offices where that card was registered may still answer to Wike's people. The constitutional question of who leads APC in Rivers, the elected governor or the godfather's machine, is not resolved. It is the live wire heading into 2027, and how it gets resolved will determine whether Fubara's apparent victory is structural or whether it is performative.
Before we go further, let's give Wike's position its full weight, because the argument his camp makes is not unreasonable on its face, and dismissing it without engaging it properly is exactly the kind of analysis this channel does not do. The case goes like this. Wike spent 8 years building Rivers State's modern political infrastructure. Every ward structure, every contractor relationship, every institutional connection traces back to his tenure as governor. When he selected Fubara as his successor, it was not a random choice. It was a deliberate decision to elevate a technocrat, a man with no independent political base, who would manage day-to-day governance competently while the broader political architecture remained under experienced custodianship. Fubara violated that arrangement almost immediately upon taking office, and his allies would argue that his refusal to honor the terms of his succession was not just personal ingratitude, it was a disruption of a system that had delivered measurable results for Rivers people. Infrastructure was built, revenue was managed, the state functioned. Here is where that case falls apart. The Nigerian constitution does not create a category for godfather-managed governance. The governor of Rivers State is constitutionally accountable to the people of Rivers State, not to a minister in Abuja who happens to be his political patron. Whatever informal arrangement Wike believes was in place has no legal standing. Fubara's obligation from the moment he was inaugurated was to the Constitution and to voters, full stop. More critically, the mechanism Wike's allies used to enforce that informal arrangement was not political mentorship, blocking budgets, filing impeachment notices over allegations that included refusal to approve fictitious budget items, refusing to acknowledge official government correspondence. These are not the tools of a political father guiding a political son. They are the tools of institutional capture, the use of legislative power to extract financial compliance from an executive. The budget padding accusation is the piece of this story that reframes everything else. If legislators tried to embed non-existent projects in a state budget and then triggered constitutional proceedings when the governor refused, that is not a political dispute. That is an alleged attempt to steal public money through legislative intimidation. Most people watching this story have been led to frame it as a personal feud. Two proud men who fell out over respect, protocol, and ego. Wike's own public framing reinforced this. He said he was not fighting Fubara, but those around Fubara who were pushing the governor against him. That framing is sophisticated and deliberately obscuring. What this story is actually about is the control of Rivers State's oil-linked budget, a state that consistently records some of the highest FARC disbursements in Nigeria's Federation account. That is the resource at the center of this conflict. Not respect, not succession protocol, billions in public money, and who gets to decide where it goes. Now, if what I just told you surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know what you think before we get to the part that changes everything.
Let's be precise about what comes next, because the signals are already visible if you know where to look. First, Wike pushes his 2027 candidate into position early. His camp has already begun consulting. Two names are in active circulation: Kingsley Chinda, the minority leader in the House of Representatives, and Marcus Eji, an executive director in the South-South Development Commission. Both are Wike loyalists. Both have been introduced into relevant federal circles. The announcement of Wike's preferred candidate will come before the end of 2026 because the goal is to force Fubara into a public declaration about his own 2027 intentions on Wike's timeline before Fubara is ready. Second, Fubara stays deliberately silent on 2027 while consolidating state resources. He has not publicly stated he wants a second term. He has not rebuilt the simplified movement, his grassroots political structure. This silence is strategic ambiguity, not political weakness. A governor who controls the Rivers State budget and has signaled federal backing from Tinubu does not need to announce his candidacy to build political capital. He only needs to govern visibly and let the accumulation of project deliveries speak. Third, watch Amewale. Whatever Wike says publicly about directing his lawmakers to comply, the actual test is in the assembly chamber. Does the 2026 Rivers budget get passed cleanly, or do new procedural crises emerge? Does Fubara get to present appropriation bills and receive commissioner confirmations without obstruction? If the assembly functions normally in the next 3 months, the peace deal has some structural foundation. If new grounds for conflict are manufactured, it means Wike has stood down publicly while maintaining operational pressure privately. 3 concrete things to monitor. 1. Whether the 2026 Rivers budget is passed without incident and whether it contains the budget lines Fubara originally refused to approve. That document will tell you who actually won the negotiation. 2. Whether Wike's ministerial position survives into the second half of 2026. APC groups have already formally demanded his removal from the FTC role. If Tinubu acts on that demand, it will signal that the president has made a definitive choice between his minister and his governor. 3. Whether Fubara formally activates the simplified movement. The moment that structure is publicly relaunched, Fubara has declared for 2027 without using the words. Which brings us back to the question that opened this analysis. What did Fubara give up, and to whom, in exchange for the peace that Wike publicly announced? Fubara answered himself without naming terms. At the New Telegraph Awards in February 2026, receiving Man of the Year, he said this, that his pursuit of peace was a deliberate choice for survival, for protecting what matters most. He called it weakness as a virtue. He dedicated the award to Wike. And then he said something telling. Some pains along the way are seen as weakness, others as strength. I chose weakness for peace, for survival.
That is not the language of a man who won unconditionally. It is the language of a man who made a calculated trade and chose not to disclose what he traded. It was widely reported that one clause of the Aso Rock peace agreement was that Fubara would not seek re-election in 2027. He has neither confirmed nor denied it. His allies say the decision rests solely on him. But the fact that the terms were never published and that the man himself framed the deal in the language of sacrifice and survival, that is the unresolved thread at the center of the story. Did Fubara win? On the immediate question of political survival, yes, he is still in government house, he is in the ruling party, multiple ACP governors backed him, Wike's legislators have been publicly stood down. By every visible metric, Fubara survived what should have ended his governorship. But did he win the war? That depends entirely on one thing, whether he runs in 2027. If he does and wins, he will have broken the Rivers godfather cycle for the first time in Rivers State's modern history. If he steps aside, then what looks like a victory was actually a managed exit. He survived the administration, he did not survive the succession. If Fubara successfully installs his 2027 candidate and Fubara accepts the one-time exit, Rivers State re-enters the cycle it has always known. Different name in government house, same power structure operating from outside it. Nigeria's democracy absorbs another demonstration that an elected governor can be functionally removed not by voters but a minister operating from another city. That precedent does not stay in Rivers. Every state with a godfather arrangement will draw conclusions from it. If Fubara breaks the pattern and wins a second term on his own terms, Rivers State will have produced something genuinely new in Nigerian politics. A governor who was suspended, humiliated, stripped of his party, handed back his office, and then won again. That precedent also does not stay in Rivers. The question I want you to take to the comments is this. If Fubara runs in 2027 and wins, was that a victory for democracy or just the beginning of the next cycle of the exact same thing, with Fubara playing the role Wike used to play? Drop your answer below, because in 2 years we will know who of us was right. If this analysis gave you clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what is really happening in Nigeria. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.